Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this webinar, Applied Research in the Society, Assessing and Improving Wellbeing in Singapore. This webinar showcases how social science research can be applied to address current issues in society, featuring presentations by 3 speakers from the Master of Applied Research in Social Sciences program. As well as a Q&A session, the webinar explores how we can assess and improve well-being for different segments of the population in Singapore. In the first talk, our first speaker, Shazawani, explores how educators can maintain their well-being and develop resilience. Next, our second speaker, Wirong, examines whether performing acts of kindness for others can make people happier. And finally, our last speaker, Chloe, examines how individuals can optimize their well-being in virtual spaces, focusing specifically on cyber well-being. After the presentations by the 3 speakers, we'll have a Q&A session. So do reserve your questions, for the Q&A sessions. So we'll be taking all the questions during the Q&A and not after each presentation. So if you have any questions, you can ask via the chat function, or you can unmute yourself and ask directly. Okay, thank you. So we'll start with the first presentation now. Shaz?
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, can you all see my screen? Quite clear, right? Okay, wait, let me. Okay, so let me begin by introducing myself and actually the importance of my topic. So I'm actually an educator working with at-risk youth since 2010. This school is actually a vocational school created in 2006 for students who have failed their PSLE and who can't actually advance to a secondary school. So they are actually focusing on vocational skills with a huge emphasis on character education. Okay, so a brief profile of the students in the school that I teach would be, they are about 12 to 18 years old, but most graduate by 16. Motivation towards learning is low when they enter the school. And apart from teaching, the teachers actually have to manage a lot of difficult, disengaged, defiant behaviors of students. So apart from teaching, there's a lot of home visits that are required by the teachers, ensuring safety of students in school and outside of school, as well as working closely with the external agencies. Okay, so my initial research when I joined the MRESS course was actually going to be on positive education and how it can improve student resilience. And in my years in this school, I actually noticed how students actually had difficulty sustaining employment. Students actually had difficulty sustaining in their when they moved on to the ITEs, they also had difficulty sustaining the education there. So I actually wanted to focus on how to use positive education to improve resilience. However, in 2018, I experienced a decline in my well-being and my resilience at work. And that actually changed the research to focus on teacher resilience. Because it occurred to me that, while I want the students to be resilient, it would be very unrealistic for me to expect them to be resilient when their role model themselves do not demonstrate resilient qualities. So I wanted to move into documenting teachers' resilience in this school particularly. And I did this through this mixed method study, which I will share in a bit. So I wanted to actually really document the lived experiences of the teachers as well as the conditions that will promote resilience in these teachers. Okay, so the statement of the problem that was researched on was teacher resilience in a school with an at-risk student population in Singapore. This school is unique because of the nature of the students in this school. And a mixed method study would help me actually understand the phenomenon of teacher resilience better. So my first and main research topic was actually a phenomenological study. And it was ideal to use phenomenology because there was no current study done in this school, and there was nothing to actually understand teacher resilience experienced by these teachers. So having this qualitative method actually helped me in understanding the essence of teacher resilience in a school that deals with at-risk youth. And then subsequently, I actually moved into gratitude intervention, which was a very short pilot intervention in how I could actually improve well-being through these cognitive behavioral strategies. And I chose a gratitude intervention because it is the most successful at increasing emotions, and positive emotions actually fuel psychological resilience, which is the focus of this study. So for my phenomenological study, there were 3 questions that guided the research. First, I really wanted to see the essence of the lived experiences of these teachers. I wanted to document it. Number 2, I actually wanted to see how the lived experience actually affect teachers' resilience. And most importantly, I wanted to document the conditions that enable teachers to thrive despite this challenging work environment. So briefly, phenomenology as a research method, I actually had 14 teachers in my research. 4 was my pilot, 10 was eventually documented in this research. The main data collection method is in-depth interviews ranging from 1.5 hours to 2 hours in length. Data analysis uses this phenomenological reduction, which I will not share in this webinar. And then the main findings were the essence of the experience with regards to the phenomenon of teacher resilience, how it affected their resilience, and the conditions needed for teachers to thrive. So this is basically how the data analysis process looked like. And to really appreciate the findings of this research, you really need to read the individual textual descriptions of each of the teacher. So it is basically their journey and what they've experienced and how they experienced it. From the individual textual descriptions, it moves on to the shared description of what was experienced and how it was experienced, to the goal of phenomenology, which is the essence of the phenomenon. So for this webinar, I'm just going to focus directly on the shared description. However, if you are interested, and I would strongly urge you to actually read the individual textual descriptions in detail when you can. Okay, so there were 5 main themes that actually came up. These were the 5 main things, experiences that the teachers actually experienced. Number 1, for resilience to be experienced, teachers actually needed to have significant challenges at work. And the significant challenges at work came in the form of difficult, disengaged students, defiant students, classroom management. And to manage these challenges, which is mostly student related, positive teacher-student relationships is strongly encouraged. Because this actually helps in managing these challenges. So when you have a positive teacher-student relationship, you can manage the class better. However, that also involves a high emotional investment, because when you spend time, you get to know them, you go for the home visits, you meet their families. There's a lot of emotional investment that goes into creating that rapport, which eventually caused an emotional drain in the teachers. So this was a heartbreaking finding of the research, which I was able to document, that the teachers were eventually drained emotionally, and this was at varying degrees. Some teachers experienced it faster, some experienced it later, some experienced it quite extreme, but there was definitely an emotional drain. So the main significance of the emotional drain would be that they were constantly angry, waking up in the middle of the night, crying, shouting in the middle of the staff room, and it did affect their personal life as well. There was also a lack of work-life balance. So teachers actually just didn't want to engage in anything outside of work, and they just wanted to sleep. All teachers in this study actually were very clear of their mission, and they were driven by passion. They all came to this school by choice. They were not posted to the school. And another most significant theme that came up in this research was actually the positive relationships. All teachers actually attributed positive relationships at work to their sustaining of their resilience. So when you look at the conditions needed for the phenomenon to exist, Naturally, it has to be a challenging work environment because resilience is basically a positive adaptation of adversity. So there was challenging work environment. For teachers who actually had to manage higher risk at-risk students, their decline in resilience was actually faster. Okay, and this finding actually helped in recommendations eventually, which I will explain later on. Passion was actually very interesting. The more passionate the teachers were, the more they actually contributed emotionally and sometimes at the expense of their own well-being. And that actually caused a decline in their resilience. At the same time, passion was also a reason to rebuild their resilience. And in terms of social support, it actually helped in sustaining resilience, especially when they had difficulties at work. Okay, so the essence and the goal of a phenomenological study is to derive at the main thing, which is the essence, okay, which I'm going to show you next. This is basically the entire thing, and I will direct you to important parts of this essence for you to understand the lived experiences. So first and foremost, teacher resilience can be sustained, rebuilt, or eroded, and this is something that was clear in this research. Having a passion and a clear sense of objective was very crucial because it helped teachers revisit when they had a challenging, difficult situation. Revisiting their purpose actually helped rebuild their resilience for them. But it was very clear that passion actually is a double-edged sword. The more passionate they were, the more they contributed to investing emotionally in the students, and at the same time, sometimes at the expense of their own well-being. A condition that came up significantly in this research was social support. The teachers in this school attributed a lot of their resilience and reasons behind it because of the strong social support they had from colleagues, reporting officers, and for some teachers, even external environment. Resilience can actually be eroded by the frequency and intensity of managing higher risk at-risk youth. So this finding actually helped me in recommending to the school that that there is a need to actually split higher risk at-risk students into different classes for better management of the class. Work-life balance is important for teachers to actually recharge, and the most important finding in this entire phenomenological study was the rebuilding of resilience. So it was very clear that through rebuilding the resilience, teachers were actually renewed. They knew where their trigger points were, their limits, and the importance for self-care. And the main condition, as I mentioned earlier, is social support. And this came in the form of very supportive colleagues, supportive reporting officers, and supportive external environment. This research was very good at documenting the good parts of how the school actually initiates staff bonding activities to build on social resources before a crisis. And I think this seems to be the consistent theme that all the teachers in this research actually experienced. So from the research findings, there were some recommendations, but these are not limited. They are more in the thesis that you can eventually read. The main thing was for teachers to actually be very clear of your personal objective when you want to work with at-risk youth. Managing your self-care, prioritizing your work-life balance, these are all personal self-responsibilities that from this research was recommended to teachers. For school management, it was important for the team to always have very positive middle managers because having a very challenging work environment and having a positive middle management team can actually help in buffering these negative emotions that the teachers can experience at work. And middle managers actually had to, a recommendation was to actually be able to identify decline in well-being, providing assistance, as well as to create formal structured platforms to actually encourage staff bonding activities. A structural process, the recommendation for structural process would be spreading the higher risk students into different classes. And if by chance there are more higher risk students in one particular class, more formal support to be given to teachers with this class. And for teachers experiencing a decline in well-being and resilience, having staff training and development through renewal process can help them improve their resilience. So the phenomenological study was very good for a starting point, because it's not meant to be a universal finding. It is just meant and based on the findings of this school and the teachers specific to this school. But I was able to actually highlight the importance for this school to ensure teachers' well-being is taken care of. It's only when the teachers are taken care of, then your students are also better taken care of. Recommendations were able to, I could concretely actually provide recommendations with evidence from these findings. And it was interesting to me that although the school is only about 14 years old, there was a consistent similar pattern in what the teachers had experienced. And knowing this pattern of experiences can help teachers in this school and school management manage these experiences. So then it moved into my gratitude intervention, which was actually a very short gratitude intervention, just to try and increase emotions, positive emotions in teachers, because we all know that good teaching is charged with positive emotions. So my intent was very simple. I wanted it to be effective, a quick fix, temporary solution when teachers feel a drop in their resilience. And being a teacher myself, I really needed to find not so difficult, time-consuming intervention so that the teachers would participate in it. So the intervention I chose was actually a gratitude visit. So teachers were able to choose any class they want, their form class, their subject class, or a challenging class, or class they enjoyed, and to write a gratitude letter to each student in that class and personally deliver it. So that was just the instructions for the gratitude intervention. Basically, from my results, it was very clear that the gratitude intervention actually increased in the teachers' job-related affective well-being. So you can see the intervention group actually had a significant higher post-test score. And then for the resilience at work scale, the intervention group also showed a more higher intervention score. So basically, the summary of the results showed that the gratitude intervention improved teachers' job-related affective well-being, resilience, and work through the scales. However, the gratitude, teachers' gratitude was actually, although it was positively correlated to their resilience, it was actually a little short. So, I mean, for me, I think I would have to look at the measures instead lah. Okay, so apart from the quantitative results of the study, what was very affirming was when teachers came up to me to tell me how the experience of writing the gratitude notes to the classes improved in their mood. One particular teacher actually shared how he had a very difficult time thinking of things to actually thank the students. And when he went back home, you know, even if it meant thanking the student for reporting 1 minute earlier or for tucking in the shirt, writing it down and giving it to the student actually created a sense of positive emotions, and the students actually felt good receiving it. The short pilot intervention study was actually very affirming, and I actually want to extend this study to actually see if teachers who actually wrote gratitude letter to each student in the class actually also noticed reduced classroom misbehavior, whether there was actually a difference after a week. And if I can, this study to be a more longitudinal study to actually study the effects of gratitude intervention on teachers' well-being and resilience in a longer term. And particularly for teachers to actually write to the most difficult class, or the class that they personally faced the biggest challenge with. So that was basically the end of my research. More details can actually be found in my thesis. But I had to rush through the last part because I know the time is up. So if you are interested in finding out more on teacher resilience and my findings, please reach out to me and I would love to share the copy of my research. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Shaz, for the enlightening talk about how educators may possibly build up their resilience, especially when they're working in a challenging environment. Okay, and now for our second speaker, Vero.
Okay, thank you. So now I'll be sharing screen to my slides. Hold on. Okay, I hope everyone can see my slides. Hi everyone. So thank you for attending this session. So my name is Kui Rong and I'm currently a student in the MRESS program. So for today's session, what I'll be sharing is actually some of the findings taken from my master's thesis. And I'll be examining the impact of kindness activities on well-being. So given that the two main keywords or constructs that I'll be focusing on is kindness as well as well-being, let's first take a closer look into how these two constructs are defined within the literature. Okay, so firstly, pro-social kindness is defined in the literature as autonomous acts that are carried out with the intent of helping others. Kindness can be perceived as a character trait that embodies the spirit of generosity, altruistic love, and benevolence. It can also be interpreted as a tendency for one to be caring and compassionate, as well as in actual practice to perform good deeds without expecting some benefit in return. The other construct that I'm looking at is happiness, which in my research, I operationalize it as subjective well-being. So subjective well-being is made up of three different components, and they are the life satisfaction, as well as the positive emotions and negative emotions of an individual. So when I refer to subjective well-being later on in my slides, you will know that I'm referring to these three different components. Moving on, so in past kindness studies or papers, two experimental protocols are most frequently adopted in kindness interventions. The first of which is known as the acts of kindness paradigm, where, as the name suggests, individuals are usually asked to carry out small acts of kindness on others. So the definition of small acts of kindness can be quite broad and encompassing. It can be a small gesture such as helping out with a household chore for family members, helping out with a colleague with a task at work, and so on and so forth. The examples are quite a lot, okay? So as for the second paradigm, it's known as pro-social spending. So this is typically the scenario where individuals are given a small amount of money, usually ranging around between $5 to $20, and they'll have the opportunity to spend it on someone else by making a purchase for the other person. So both paradigms have been shown to boost the subjective well-being in givers, meaning to say, after carrying out the kindness activity, they usually experience some benefit to their well-being. So in my research, actually, I conducted two separate studies, study 1 and study 2, to examine the effectiveness of each paradigm and their effects on my participants' well-being. But due to the interest of time today, I will mainly be focusing on the segment regarding acts of kindness. Now to share a little bit more information about the relationship between kindness and well-being. So actually, in the literature, there's a strong positive relationship between kindness and various well-being outcomes, such as an improvement to occupational satisfaction, improvement in subjective well-being, as well as higher psychological well-being. This positive relationship between engaging in kindness activities and participants' well-being is also replicated across different research designs, such as correlational studies, experimental studies, as well as interventional studies. In fact, there's also evidence to support the effectiveness of kindness intervention in enhancing happiness in cross-cultural research. So for example, in this study conducted by Agnin and colleagues in 2013, the team actually explored the correlation between using pro-social spending and its impact on participants' subjective well-being in 136 countries. And the results actually found that pro-social spending led to an improvement in their participants' subjective well-being, and this result was consistently replicated. So at this point, I think it's safe to say that we have quite a lot of evidence to establish the positive link between kindness and well-being. So you might ask, why do we need to conduct further research in this area? So here are some limitations, methodological limitations that might be of interest to you. The first of which is that in past kindness studies, many researchers actually utilize a correlational study design. And this meant that researchers might be unable to infer causal conclusion because there might be other variables involved in the research design that has not been controlled for. Secondly, several past studies also utilize a smaller sample size, which meant that they might be hindered because this might lead to an elevated risk of committing type 2 errors, or in other words, the failure to detect experimental effects that are actually present. And last but not least, this is not so much of a methodological limitation, but just a note that outside of the Western context, there is still a lack of studies that examine the benefits of kindness enactment. So this brings me to one of the main aims of my present research, which is that I'm really interested to look at the dosage of kindness intervention. And what I mean by dosage is specifically to the frequency as well as the duration that is employed in the kindness intervention. Based on past studies, there's no fixed recommended dosage at present, which means to say that past studies actually used varying frequencies and durations to carry out their kindness intervention. So in effect, even though there's a lot of evidence to support the positive link between kindness and well-being, there are also studies that showed results that are not significant or that there's no finding. So for example, in this study by Kerr, O'Donovan, and Pepping in 2015, they utilized a shorter duration of 2 weeks. By the end of the intervention, they found that participants did not improve in happiness. And the same goes for another study, just to give an example, by Khan in 2019. So they actually utilized a longer kindness intervention this time, up to 6 weeks, with each session lasting for an hour. But the results also showed that there's no reliable change to their participants' subjective well-being. And this is why the main aim of my study is to really look at the applied dosage of the kindness intervention and to see whether there's an impact on my participants' subjective well-being. There are also other benefits to looking at the dosage. So for example, if we are able to arrive at an optimal dosage, this could serve as a good calibration for future studies to align towards. And at the same time, this might also help to prevent unnecessary fatigue in participants because they do not have to carry out intervention dosage of that are excessively high. And at the same time, this might also help to reduce the probability of ineffective intervention. And the broader scope of things in a broader context, I also hope that carrying out this research would help to improve the happiness of the local population by promoting more pro-social behaviors and kindness enactment. So a little bit more information about the sample and the methodology. So to kind of address the limitations of a correlational study design, in my research, I'm using a short-term longitudinal study that spans up to 6 weeks of intervention. So this means that participants have to complete their online study at baseline, as well as at the follow-up junctures of week 1 and week 6. Notice that there's also a between subject experimental component, and this means that all participants are randomly assigned to one of 3 experimental conditions. So I'll now take some time to walk you through what are the 3 experimental conditions in my study. The first condition is known as the 1-week kindness condition. So where participants are asked to complete 6 kindness acts across 2 separate days in the first week. And after the first week, the participants do not have to complete kindness acts anymore. Instead, they will be asked to do a different activity, which is the same as the active control condition, which I'll elaborate further in a short while. The second experimental condition is known as the 6 weeks kindness condition, where participants have to complete 3 kindness acts within a day. And this will carry on throughout the experiment until the end of the intervention at the end of 6 weeks. And finally, we have the control condition, where participants do not have to complete any kindness acts, but instead they are requested to submit an online diary on a twice-weekly basis. So an online diary would simply be asking participants to fill out in 1 to 2 sentences their daily routines or events of the day. Some other quick information. So all data is collected via the Qualtrics platform and they are secured. And in terms of recruitment, we actually sampled from SUSS students as well as members of the public to try and improve our sample size. So the final sample size stands at 364 participants, which is not a small number, but we have lost some participants to attrition along the way. Okay, now I'll be sharing the 3 main hypotheses or the predictions that I have for this study. So the first one is actually looking into the intervention effect of carrying out acts of kindness. So I predicted that participants that are assigned to the acts of kindness conditions, they should have bigger increase in their subjective well-being compared to participants in the control group who did not experience or carry out acts of kindness. So this should be more straightforward. And for the second hypothesis, I'm interested to looking at the effects of the dosage of the kindness intervention. So I predicted at the end of the first week, participants who are assigned to the 1-week kindness condition, they should experience higher levels of subjective well-being. This is because they carried out a higher frequency of kindness acts at 6 compared to participants in the 6 weeks kindness condition who only completed 3 kindness acts for the first week. So this hypothesis 2 is about examining the frequency of kindness acts performed. Okay, and finally for hypothesis 3, this is about the comparison of the duration of the intervention. So I predicted that after 6 weeks, participants in a 6-week condition would experience higher levels of well-being compared to those in the 1-week condition because they have completed a longer duration of kindness intervention activity. So now we'll move on to talk a bit more about the online survey and questionnaire that was used. So actually all the items were utilized and taken from past validated instruments. One example is to measure for life satisfaction. I used the quite commonly used satisfaction with life skill. And also another note is that all items are publicly accessible. The survey also collected some demographic data on participants' gender, age, and educational level. So now I'll move on to talk about the main results of the study. I'll summarize it as best as I can. So it'll be in line with the 3 hypotheses that I just mentioned earlier. So I predicted that for the first hypothesis, there should be a main effect of carrying out acts of kindness, right? So the first hypothesis was not supported. So what we find is that acts of kindness was not a significant predictor of participants' subjective well-being at the end of the first week. Next, I'll talk about hypothesis 2 and 3, where we're talking about the dosage of implemented kindness acts. So unfortunately, both hypotheses 2 and 3 were also not supported. That means to say, at the end of week 1 and at the end of week 6, we did not see that the dosage was not a significant predictor of participants' subjective well-being. So this means that participants did not report higher life satisfaction, higher positive emotions, and lower negative emotions as we have predicted. So this means that overall, based on my present research, despite the strong link between kindness and well-being in past research, I did not find any concrete evidence to support this prediction. However, with this set of results comes with some limitations that I have to acknowledge for this study. The first of which concerns the implementation fidelity. So what I've noticed is that for my participants, there's actually some form of imprecision in how they carried out the kindness intervention. So for example, to give you a taste of what I mean, participants in the 1-week kindness condition, they should have carried out 6 kindness acts across 2 separate days of the week. But what I find is that many participants required more time to carry out the kindness act. So they could have carried out in across 4 days or more of the week. So this might have led to a watering down effect of the kindness intervention or dilution of the intervention effect, which might have been a possibility to why we did not achieve significant findings. Secondly, I have to talk about the impact of the global pandemic because this is the times that we're living in now. So the data collection actually spanned from, I think for this study, it was from June to October. So during these past couple of months, we have seen quite a few changes to the safe management measures, and this might have some negative impact or interference to the well-being of my participants, seeing as how there were some restrictions to dining, household visitors, and even maybe work arrangements. So I did not directly assess for this in my research, but I'm saying that this could be a possibility to why the negative effect could have outweighed any positive effects of the kindness intervention. Now moving on to some recommendations on how to improve for future studies. Firstly, we should try to improve the fidelity of the implemented kindness acts. So one way is to definitely send out emails. So what we have been doing is to send out emails on a weekly basis to remind participants of their assigned instructions. But I think moving forward, what could be done is to perhaps send it on a more frequent basis, such as an alternate day basis. And if not, we can even use instant messaging as another modality to improve the reach to participants. And hopefully, if participants check their phones more regularly, this could help to ensure that they're more responsive, and hopefully it could help to mitigate the issue of attrition over time. So last but not least, this is the last slide. So I just wanted to reiterate again that even though for this study, I did not manage to find concrete evidence to support the link between kindness and well-being, I feel that this is unprecedented times that we are living in. So, and with about 2 years now that we are living in with the pandemic, I think there's a rising notion of a pandemic fatigue. So I think this is all the more reason why there should be more research conducted in this area to see whether kindness interventions and its effects really do hold true and lead to an improvement to participants' well-being. So hopefully on a national level, there could be more research by policymakers to conduct more evidence-based policymaking. On a community level, it might be also good to, if we can have a resurgence or more campaigns of the like, such as the Singapore Kindness Movement, to increase awareness and promote for more kindness activities. And finally, on an individual level, I think it would be good if all of us can, practice kindness acts and its enactment in a more regular basis, so that there could be a forward momentum and upward spiral of more positive activities and kindness activities. Yeah, so on this note, I would like to end my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you, Guru, for this interesting talk about some of the possible positive psychological interventions that may be used to improve our well-being. Okay, and now for our last speaker, Chloe.
Can you all see it fine? Is this okay? Thank you. So I'm Chloe, and I'm an introvert. And I spend a lot of time online, and I really prefer to communicate with my friends through WhatsApp instead of meeting them physically. Yeah, I'm guilty of that. And because I spend so much time online, my well-being appears to be poor based on conventional definitions. My parents are always saying, can you get out of the house? Can you go out and meet people? And it just seems like I'm not healthy because I'm neglecting the physical world. And yet, I feel happy and satisfied with my life. So it really got me wondering, am I really worse off? Is well-being online and offline different? And that led me to my research, where I aim to define cyber well-being and to develop and validate a measure for it. And I do believe that this is important work because our behavioral patterns in this digital age are different from that of previous generations. So today I'll bring you through my research, from introducing the topic, how my study was conducted, the results, as well as a discussion of these results. So let's go. So why cyber well-being? Globally, the prevalence of internet users have been increasing, and in Singapore specifically, 89% of the population above 7 years old use the internet, and we are spending more than 7 hours online every day. In fact, we are using the internet for practically every aspect of our lives. We are using the internet to search for information, for communication, for entertainment, for social networking. We also use it to store records, to talk to people, acquire food, shop for necessities, to present research findings, all things that used to be done physically. And the internet is so essential now because we use it for both work and leisure activities. With the ongoing pandemic, I think many of us would agree that we are spending more time online than usual. Let's consider cyber well-being and traditional well-being. I believe that they are different because their determinants are different. The skills required to thrive in cyberspace are different from the skills required in the physical world. In fact, the social norms online are different from social norms offline. And what we see is that human behavior tends to be amplified and accelerated online because we feel less inhibited. And yet, existing measures of well-being are based on face-to-face interactions and may not adequately reflect well-being online. Also, with the pandemic, we are moving towards a new normal. It's possible that the post-pandemic environment will be highly reliant on technology, like what we are experiencing now. And this means that the need to understand cyber well-being is now more urgent so that we can adapt better and thrive in the post-pandemic environment. So we see that cyber well-being is different from traditional well-being. But would the context also affect cyber well-being? Work and leisure are two significant aspects of our lives. For many people, work is about earning a living. I mean, of course, work can also instill a sense of responsibility and help us create something with our lives. But fundamentally, we need to pay the bills. On the other hand, leisure activities are concerned with relaxation and enjoyment. Looking at technology, we want technology to be useful but enjoyable for work, to be useful for work but enjoyable for leisure. Also, the motivations behind our online activities differ. For example, successful impression management at work is related to positive outcomes like promotions and higher pay, but impression management for leisure is more about social comparisons and appearing to be doing better than others. Clearly, work and leisure are two very distinct contexts, and the question is, would cyber well-being then be different for work and leisure? Before I attempt to measure cyber well-being, I need to define what it is exactly. So drawing on the existing knowledge in positive psychology and cyber psychology, cyber well-being is defined as the positive functioning of internet users in the cyberspace. With that, I had 3 research questions. First, What are the dimensions underlying cyber well-being? Second, how is cyber well-being different between the work and leisure context? And finally, is cyber well-being different from traditional concepts of well-being? So now let's quickly talk about the methods. The study comprised of 4 stages: the initial item development, 2 quantitative surveys, and qualitative interviews. In phase 1, an extensive lit review was conducted, focusing on the well-being effects of life in the cyberspace. Throughout the process, the focus was on the biopsychosocial impact of cyber activities. In phase 2, an online survey was conducted and EFA was performed to examine the factor structure of the skills. And in phase 3, another online survey was conducted with a different set of participants. CFA was conducted to test the model obtained in phase 2, and further analysis of internal consistency and discriminant consistency validity were also performed. Finally, in phase 4, qualitative interviews were conducted to understand the differences between cyber well-being for work and leisure. This table shows the profile of the participants in all 3 phases. Employment status determined the measures that participants had to complete. So working adults completed the skills for both work and leisure, while students and unemployed individuals only completed the leisure skills. And for the qualitative interviews, recruitment was purposive to maximize the variations between participants. There was a good mix of participants in the public and private sector, as well as a mix of different industries and job functions. These were the materials used for data collection. In phase 2, the initial 50 items were administered with questions on demographic profile. In phase 3, items retained from phase 2 were administered with demographic questions and the flourishing scale. And finally, in phase 4, the interview guide consists of 3 sections aimed to understand the participants' jobs, their views about the differences in cyber well-being for work and leisure, and their views about the differences found in the earlier phases. And now for the exciting results. In the first phase, 50 items were developed across 5 dimensions, and through factor analysis, the measures were eventually scaled down to 20 items across 5 dimensions for the leisure scale, and 25 items across 5 dimensions for the work scale. So here, cyber well-being for work has 5 dimensions: social wellness, self-efficacy, sense of safety, self-portrayal, and positive emotions. You can see examples of the items on this slide. And for leisure, again, we found 5 dimensions, and this time they are social wellness, self-efficacy, sense of safety, self-portrayal, and empowerment. So again, you can see the examples of the items on this slide. But one thing to note is, notice that empowerment is a dimension for the leisure scale and not for work, while positive emotions is a dimension for the work scale and not for leisure. With the finalization of the items, the scales were scored and compared with scores on the flourishing scale. What we found was a weak to moderate relationship between cyber well-being and flourishing, showing that they are related but distinct concepts. And so what does all this mean? Is a lot of stats, and then what? Looking back at the research questions, we found that cyber well-being is multidimensional with different dimensions for work and leisure. Also, there are differences between cyber well-being for work and leisure. There are different dimensions and different items within the dimensions. Finally, there was a moderate relationship between the cyber well-being and flourishing scores. Now let's dive in to look at the different dimensions. So 2 dimensions were exactly the same for work and leisure. First is self-efficacy, which is the belief in one's ability to perform online activities. Scores for self-efficacy for work and leisure showed no significant differences. Second is self-portrayal, or the ability to express one's true self online. While the items were the same for this dimension, scores for leisure were significantly higher than scores for work. And this may indicate that participants feel safer to express their true selves within the leisure context than the work context. And this may reflect the need for impression management at work, since positive image is associated with better performance appraisals. The next 2 dimensions were the same for both work and leisure, but the items within the dimensions were different. The first dimension is social wellness, which is a sense of social support. It includes feelings of inclusion, appreciation, and strong relationships. In fact, social wellness accounts for the greatest variance in cyber well-being, which indicates that a strong social network is most predictive of cyber well-being. Also, social wellness differs between work and leisure. So items related to emotional support like comfort and care were part of the leisure measure, but not the work measure. And participants in the qualitative interviews expressed that different forms of support are expected of people at work. At work, things tend to be more serious and support appears to be task-oriented. And the second dimension is a sense of safety, which is the absence of psychological abuse or bullying online. Interestingly, there were privacy concerns and teasing for leisure and not for work. And again, this may indicate that the online work environment appears to be safer. And again, it possibly boils down to the boundaries at work where impression management matters. Finally, we have two dimensions that work only for either the work or the leisure skill. Positive emotions surface as a dimension of cyber well-being at work, and it involves feeling good about online activities at work. It's interesting that this appeared for work and not leisure. However, discussions with participants revealed that the restrictive nature at work may have amplified the need for positive emotions, causing it to contribute to cyber well-being. On the other hand, the fifth dimension for leisure was empowerment, which involves ideas of self-actualization through the improvement of skills and gaining of knowledge. It appears that work is seen as a necessity for the fulfillment of basic needs. And only when these basic needs are met, then we are able to pursue growth needs in our own personal time and space. So what are the implications of this research? Firstly, cyber well-being is a multidimensional construct. So it's possible that an individual can have high scores on one dimension but have low scores on others. So understanding the multiple constructs would then allow us for more targeted interventions if required. Secondly, cyber well-being differs depending on the context. Different conditions contribute to cyber well-being at work and leisure. So to improve cyber well-being, different issues need to be addressed for both contexts. And finally, cyber well-being is different from flourishing. Cyber well-being scores were moderately related to flourishing scores. And in fact, cyber well-being may actually contribute to flourishing, but they are not equivalent constructs. Of course, this study is not without limitations. Firstly, the data collection was conducted during the pandemic when many participants were spending more time at home and online. Thus, there's the potential that the results may not reflect the pre-pandemic environment. However, the extent to which this is a limitation depends on the landscape of the post-pandemic environment. Secondly, online activities are varied and wide-ranged. The scales measure the different aspects of cyber well-being now, but with the rapid changes in technology, the scales may be limited in its utility in the future. And finally, this study provides an initial validation of the cyber well-being skills. However, many psychometrics analysis was not conducted. Considering the limitations, future research is centered around the further validation of the cyber well-being skills. With so much potential, the development of the skills opens up possibilities into understanding well-being in the cyberspace. And before I end this presentation, I really want to talk about what this means for you. How can you maintain a positive cyber well-being? Firstly, maintain the balance between the physical and virtual world. It's not about how much time you spend online, it's how you spend it and whether or not you are isolated from the physical world. So enjoy the time online. Watch your Netflix, play your games, but stay tethered to the physical world. Secondly, build your technological self-efficacy, especially at work. Yes, technology moves so fast, but build your skills and believe that you can adapt to the changing demands. And finally, stay connected and work on your relationships, because staying connected to your friends and family is the biggest predictor of cyber well-being. With that, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chloe, for this engaging talk on cyber well-being. Right, so we have now come to the end of our three presentations. So if you have questions for any of the speakers or all the three speakers, so you can raise them during this Q&A session. You can ask the questions directly by unmuting yourself, or you can type your question using the chat function. Okay, maybe I'll start the ball rolling by asking the speakers some questions. All right, so Shaz, in the media, we frequently read about teachers experiencing and reporting burnout as well as experiencing high stress. So what do you think are some of the factors that may play a role in lowering their well-being?
Okay, so for my school specifically, it is the emotional burnout. For other schools, it would probably most likely be the workload after school, the markings and all that. So it's a bit different, but I think the emotional burnout can lower teachers' well-being in this school, and how a teacher actually perceives challenges in the classroom, right? Students are going to be observing it. So which comes back to the main research aim, which was I really wanted to document the reasons behind the decline in well-being and how we can improve it, which once we identify it, which the best way to actually improve the positive emotions would be through PPIs, which the gratitude intervention so clearly showed me. And I was so happy to actually see the effects of it, and having 60 teachers participate in it and share with me their experiences was very affirming, and it was very nice.
Thank
Good
you.
evening.
Yes, we have a question.
Sorry, hi, Sharifah here. I have one question for Shaza, if it's okay.
Yes.
Yeah, one is a comment. I really like it because at the onset, it's supposed to, the research centers on looking at the resilience and tenacity of students. But then it's really true, like teachers can't serve on an empty plate. So I
Yeah.
think to research on the resilience of teachers is really appalling. Thank you so much. Just want to ask one thing, because the research is in your school. So I'm just wondering, what about biasness? Because as a researcher.
Okay, so yeah, that is a valid point. So basically, qualitative research actually involves being involved in the research, but I specifically chose transcendental phenomenology because it uses participants' words and not interpretation. And also because I had also gone through an experience of my resilience being at its lowest. I only started after I recovered, and the research method was very important. If I had chosen any other qualitative method, it would have involved a lot of interpretation, which could skew the results. But I was very, very particular in ensuring that the research method I chose was really about picking up participants' words. So if you read the thesis, you would notice that it's all in the participants' words. So there's a lot of quote unquote. You can really journey with the participants' feelings and experiences. And I would love for you to see it.
I will certainly email you. I would like to read. Yeah, thank you.
Yes, welcome.
Do we have questions for the other speakers or Shaz as well? Questions, anyone?
Actually, to add on to what Sharifah asked, right? The truth is actually teacher resilience is not really researched on as much. There is so much more research on teacher burnout, emotional burnout, and that's definitely not proportionate. And also in the Singapore context, local research in terms of teacher resilience and well-being is very, very little. So hopefully this actually contributes to teacher well-being research. Yeah. But it's only specific to this school. It's not a universal finding. Yeah, that's all. Anyone else has any questions?
Okay, if not, okay, can I ask one more question for Hui Rong? Hui Rong, so, previous research has found that pro-social behavior, such as performing acts of kindness, which is what you have done in your study. So previous research has shown that pro-social behavior enhances subjective well-being. However, in your study, the kindness interventions did not significantly improve participants' well-being. So you have mentioned some limitations of this study. So what do you think could be some of the other possible reasons for why the kindness interventions have no beneficial effects on the participants?
Right. So in my limitations just now, I acknowledged two reasons, right, as to why not be a significant finding. I think the first of which I will just reiterate and summarize. Okay. So the first of which was the point on implementation fidelity. So even though participants in the kindness conditions, they did carry out kindness acts as they are supposed to, there was an imprecision in terms of the exact number of kindness acts that we were asking for. So for example, participants in a 1 week kindness condition, they're supposed to complete 6 kindness acts, but many of them might have overcompensated. They completed a bit more or a bit less, and some of them took more days to complete the dosage. So when it's spread out over more days, right, than expected, this could lead to what I was saying, a watering down or dilution of the intervention effect. So this could be one real possibility why. But on this note, I didn't have time just now, but I want to elaborate that this problem is mitigated to some extent because participants, like I said, did some of them did do more kindness acts than was expected of them. So, I mean, the intentional act of completing kindness acts would help also to boost the effect. So I think it's mitigated to some extent. Another reason that I brought up, the second factor was circumstantial factor, which is basically referring to the effects of the pandemic, which I did not measure for in my study, but I do feel that because this is a short-term longitudinal study that lasts for 6 weeks, so not only is participants measured on their well-being at baseline, but also at the end of week 1 and week 6. So assuming that there was some, disruptions from the safe management measures along the way, this could have impacted participants' emotions or life satisfaction at that juncture, which could have, reduced their subjective well-being for reasons that's not really related to the kindness intervention. This could happen. I can't confirm nor disconfirm this. Yeah, so just stating it as a possibility. And finally, I didn't bring out this third factor because I didn't have point, but I think there might also be some cultural factors or cultural norms involved at play. And why I say that is because most of the recommendations that I use in my study, such as, asking participants to complete 6 kindness acts across 2 separate days or completing 3 acts in 1 day, these are drawn references from other published studies in the past, and they're usually taken from the Western context. So this is one of the study that's conducted in the local context. So participants might have find it more intensive because of cultural norms. They might not be used to carrying out acts of kindness at such a high frequency or over such a long period. They might find it too intensive or too exhausting for them. So if that were the case, then that could be also a reason why we did not find significant findings as we hoped for this research. Yep. So these are the 3 factors that I thought of.
Varun, thanks for the elaboration and the further clarifications. Okay, do we have other questions for any other speakers? All right, let me ask one more question again. Okay, Chloe. Yeah, so in this pandemic environment, so now over the past 2 years, there have been strict social distancing measures, as well as nowadays work from home is a new norm, and which means there is strong reliance on technology. So how do you think cyber well-being has changed from the pre-pandemic to this pandemic period? I mean, we're all spending a lot of time, more time online, whether by choice or not by choice.
I think the change is really about, it starts off with that time element where we are spending more time online. And what became important to maintain cyber well-being is the setting of boundaries. So through the pandemic, it has been a very interesting 2 years, right? So we see people increasing social media usage over the 2 years of pandemic. At the same time, we see that people there's also a group of people who recognize that social media and all the negative news that you see every day is impacting their well-being. And so they are withdrawing from social well-being as well. So I think the pandemic, with that increased amount of time we're spending online, really pushed us to a point where we need to then see what works for us, what doesn't work for us, and then work around our boundaries and set our boundaries. How am I going to use technology for my benefit? And so I think that was the biggest takeaway from these 2 years.
Thank you. Then do you have any other sort of like recommendations for how people may improve their cyber well-being during this time? I mean, since we probably will continue to spend a lot of time online.
I think one thing is that balance. So it's okay to be spending like tons of time like watching something or on social media, but are you also spending time with people in that physical world? So it's okay. Like sometimes if you're online, you can be spending that time talking to to your family, talking to your friends. And these people are actually people who exist in your physical space when you can, with all the safe distancing measures. So having that connection back down to the physical world is the key to like doing well online. And so that one key thing that I really, really emphasize is that keeping connected and staying in touch with people, that's gonna be the biggest thing that's for us to survive this pandemic.
Thank you, Chloe. Do we have other questions from the audience, from the participants? No other questions? All right, if not, thank you for all your presentations. I'm sure we have all benefited a lot from your presentations and learn, about how we can better maintain our well-being or even improve our well-being, especially during these challenging times. Right, so thank you. All right, thank you. So this is the end of the webinar.